Good evening. Welcome to the Thursday, January 25th, 2018 special meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. I'm Board President Rochelle Sharris-Watt, and I will now take roll. Director Welsh?
Here.
Director Hasai?
Here.
Vice President Natoli? Here. Unfortunately, Director Deppie has a family commitment and will not be joining us this evening. Before we take public comment, we'd like to note that item B on the closed session agenda was an error and will not be relevant to this evening's proceedings. Now we will take any public comment on items appearing on the closed session agenda. Seeing as there are none, we will now adjourn to the closed session and return for the regular meeting at 7:30 p.m. All right, good evening. Welcome to the Thursday, January 25th, 2018 regular meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District Board of Directors. I'm Board President Rochelle Sharris-Watt, and I will now take roll. Director Hasai?
Here.
Vice President Natoli?
Here.
Director Welsh?
Here.
Director Deppie unfortunately had a family commitment and will not be in attendance this evening. We would wish to note that we have nothing to report out from the closed session. We will take public comments, but we want to note that the concern about police vandalism will be addressed during the staff comment period following public discussion. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment?
Yes, but I'd like to know if I may. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I would like to know if you'll be taking public comments at the close of the commentary regarding the vandalism, because my comments relate to that. In other words,
I believe that the chief will be probably answering some questions, but the item is not adjourned, agendized. So it won't necessarily be a back and forth. I think public comments are appropriate.
all right, then,
Okay.
So I think you need to make your comments now.
all right. That being the case, thank you very much for this report on the recent vandalism and car thefts. I'd like to point out that this is a little bit like what we used to have on a regular monthly basis when Chief Harmon was doing a monthly report on incidents that had occurred with descriptions of what kind of incident and roughly where those incidents had occurred. I think that's very useful for the community, and I'd like to see that practice restored. I'd like to also know what efforts are being made for recruitments. I understand that one cannot predict sprees necessarily like the kind that we have had recently, but we've also become something of a free-for-all here in Kensington. I have heard that it is not restricted to vehicle vandalism and that other incidents have occurred. So I'd like to know what efforts are being made for recruitment, as I understand us to be 5 officers and the chief. I'd like to know how the shortage of officers is being addressed by the department. And I'd like to see a long-term solution to the Memorandum of Understanding so as to stabilize this district rather than waiting to see what's going to happen and string it along so that it looks like it's headed for contracting out and making it terribly unattractive for recruits for officer positions and to attract reserves. Thank you very much.
Mabry Benson here. I wanted to remind people that when the ad hoc committee did their investigations on the subject of contracting out, one of the questions, and Tony, it'd be nice if you pointed this out, reminded Matrix of this issue, that one of the questions we specifically asked of all the people we talked to was whether they would hire any of our current officers, and all of them said that our officers would be welcome to apply as anyone else would be, and that if they qualify, yes, they could be part of the new department. And I just want to comment on my part that if our officers aren't good enough to qualify for these other departments, I don't know really why we would want them here. So in a sense, our officers have a modicum of protection, particularly if they're a good, well-behaving, upstanding officer. Thank you.
Gillette. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to echo Linda's comments. I'm actually here on behalf of several of my neighbors and friends who are quite concerned about the rash of car break-ins and burglaries. And we were disappointed that these things were not on the agenda. I did ask the board president to explain why it's not been on the board agenda, but I didn't get an answer to that. Maybe you're just too busy to respond because I sent it pretty late. But I think the community is quite interested in what the plan is to address these issues in our community, since it is unusual and since we're down these officers. So I would hope that, I look forward to hearing Mr. Chief Hull's explanation of what he's doing, and I would hope that the board would take this up as well. Thank you.
Marilyn Stolen. I want to address some of the public comments made about our police services. We are now engaged in a fact-finding and problem-solving process through the Matrix Group, and the board needs to hold off on major decisions impacting hiring police staff and finances until the report is in about 4 to 6 months, as I recall. In my view, we have Tony Constantouris, a highly experienced general manager who has managed towns much larger than ours with more complex issues. And we need to support his experienced judgment and advice to the board, whatever that is. Would one extra officer stop crimes at 4 a.m.? Doubtful, as they occur in seconds. Do more officers on staff decrease crime? Not exactly proven in the 1 to 2 studies out there. Has our department with 10 police staff over the years actually have a higher staffing ratio in comparison to other similar towns in Contra Costa? Absolutely. It's higher than Moraga, Clayton, Orinda, as I recall. I could get the LAFCO stats on this if requested. Is it cheaper to pay overtime than hire an officer? Yes. Can we hire a temp officer, contract limited? I don't know. It's done in business, but law enforcement is another realm. The reality is we have a town with a consistently low crime rate for years, virtually no Part 1 violent crimes, homicides, assaults. Our major problems are ID theft, vandalism, and auto break-ins. This exists everywhere, and looking at San Francisco, where car burglaries are rampant, you can see it's a difficult crime to resolve. So what we're seeing in Kensington is no different than surrounding towns. Lastly, I see that an MOU for the police is on the table, and while I'm not in favor of an increase, I would support it because it is short-term until we see where we stand following the recommendations of the Matrix report. I'm not in favor of hiring additional police staff, considering we have been working at times with 6 to 7 staff for a few years, and more staff, contrary to public opinion, is not a guarantee of lower crime rates. Better to use our staff to patrol vigilantly, to be visible in the community, up and down the town during the shifts. Thank you.
Good evening, Lisa Corona. I haven't had a chance to read this new statement on vandalism, but thank you for producing that. I think it helps to get all that out in the open. I personally have been getting calls from people who never come to these meetings saying, what the heck is going on? A car was stolen on my block, all these break-ins on cars, and clearly robbery and car thefts are way, way up in this community. As I understand it, we have 9 officers budgeted and only 5 actually on patrol or working in the department, which is almost a 50% decrease in our police staffing. This district's major charge is policing and public safety. That's the main purpose of this district. I think the community that expects the board, the general manager, the police chief, to be conducting efficient operations to the best of their ability to make sure that the primary services are administered at the highest level possible. I personally don't think we can wait, although I'm very happy this study is going and is underway. I don't think we personally can wait for 5 months for the study, 3 months for deliberation, half a year to figure out whether we're going to contract, put out RFPs, or hire more officers. That all takes tremendous amount of time. And I don't think we can exist at a 50% staffing employment during that period when that's what this community is paying for and expecting. So at minimum, I would urge and recommend the board do put this at the top of their agenda, because it is the top of their responsibilities as far as I can determine, and make sure that the public is at least aware of steps being taken to fill that gap, get more officers on the streets, take whatever action is necessary to resolve pending personnel issues that may be occurring, and make sure that this community feels and sees the result of efficient operations. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, we'll first have comments from the board. Are there any board comments? No? All right, I briefly have one comment. Excuse me. Now I need to find my... I apologize for finding my handout. There it is. I want to alert you that there is a young gentleman who has a Kensington grandparent, a former student at Hilltop, who went missing last Saturday afternoon. His family is frantic. He was at El Cerrito del Norte BART station and hasn't been seen since. His name is Julian Curtis, and I will post this flyer. It's being handled by the Richmond Police. So if you see the flyer and take a note, and that would be very helpful. So thank you very much. Any information or tips can, of course, be directed to Chief Hull or Detective Sergeant Stonebreaker with the Richmond Police. Any other staff comment before we move on to Chief Hull?
Could I make a quick one?
Yes, please.
Just want to report on a similar note. We also had a missing child in the park, from school grounds this week, and Chief Hull and Officer Wilkins did an excellent job of helping to locate that child, and was missing for a full hour, and that person's mother was very grateful and asked me to please, again, pass along my thanks to Officer Wilkins and Chief Hull, and was very grateful for the help that was given.
I was asked to report that Paul Moss came by the office today and encouraged the board to consider his thinking that Nixle should be part of something that the board takes up in the next few months.
Oh, I've had conversation with Mr. Moss, and he is aware now that the board is agendizing that item for February 8th. That Chief Hull and I had been in conversation concerning that issue previously, and that I outlined fully for Mr. Moss our emergency services plan for the coming year. So Chief Hull will address the report that he has prepared.
Hello, everyone. I prepared a report kind of outlining what's happening with the vandalisms that seems to be on everyone's mind that occurred with the coming new year. You can grab a copy. I'll try to summarize this, and then I'll take some questions from anyone that they may have. Essentially, first of all, let me identify, there's a mistake on here. I listed 20 vehicles, there were actually 19, and there were 2 residences. One residence actually got a window shot with a BB or pellet. The other residence was an attempted residential burglary. These were all reported during the same times that the vehicles that had the smashed windows were reported to the police department. So we had a rash of vehicle vandalisms, and they occurred between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. in the morning. It appears that the perpetrators were driving through town. There are some evidence to say that there may have been 2 different vehicles. We had some vehicle vandalisms that occurred in the Eureka area, Anson area, Franciscan Way. There were a couple there, but the lion's share of the damage occurred on the streets up behind the Arlington Store Group on Yale Avenue, Kenyon Avenue, Beloit Avenue. We had a couple of residents who had video of the suspect, but the videos were not clear. We didn't have a clear picture of the vehicle. We didn't get a clear picture of the license plate, and there's no picture of a suspect. What we did get that we could use there was some audio that you can hear, and it clearly sounded like several males, young males, and you can hear the action of what sounded to me like a semi-automatic pellet or air gun. That's consistent with some of the damage, because some of the cars, not only were either 1 or 2 windows shattered on a car, but the car itself, the quarter panel, also had some damage, and it was consistent with a BB or pellet. We had 1 officer working that night. Now, I must say that even if we would have had 2 officers working, there's no guarantee that this still would not have happened. And I say that based upon this type of vandalism occurred in several cities across the state. It wasn't an isolated incident, and there was no way for the police department or myself to be able to anticipate that this was going to happen. So going forward, given the nature of this type of crime, I think I can anticipate that it will probably happen again. And it seems to be isolated just to the holiday season with the coming of the new year. There's no evidence to say that it's going to occur throughout the year, as opposed to having some type of challenge between a young demographic as to how much windows can get shot out. Now, I say that to say this. That was the motivation as to why I did not produce a press release, because I didn't want to give the perpetrators throughout all the cities in California a way to compare what they did with each other. That was my thinking on that. Going forward, I can anticipate, since it did not happen from the 31st to the 1st, it happened from the 1st to the 2nd. I can anticipate either that day or that day or the 2 days after the 1st to ensure that we have more staffing on the graveyard shift in order to either prevent this crime from occurring or possibly catching a suspect or suspects that would be responsible. I learned in the middle of the month after I attended a chief's meeting about some of the other cities that suffered the same crimes. So what I asked for our detective to do is to run the 80 corridor from Oakland to Pinole, to include the city of Benicia, which I heard suffered the same crime, and contact their detective units and share the information that we have with them, and to gather the information they have to see if we can get as many small pieces of information that could possibly produce a suspect or some information that we can run or create an investigation. So that's where we are as an agency as far as pursuing the vandalisms to the vehicles. Let me speak to just the one attempted residential burglary. When that call came out, it was consistent with the rest of the calls on the damage to the vehicles. It wasn't until I got on scene that I realized it was not a vehicle, it was actually a window on a residence. And looking around, I found the evidence of what was used to shatter the window. And having a discussion with the resident, we determined that the responsibles shattered the window using small porcelain chips, probably discovered that she was actually home, and then did not go into the house. She only discovered the crime because when she came out of the room, she felt a cold draft and didn't understand why the heater kept kicking on. And then that's when she discovered the shattered window. So if there's any questions with respect to the vandalisms and the crimes that occurred with the coming of the new year, please be willing to take them. Yes, ma'am.
My car window was shattered, and it wasn't on New Year's. We got back to New York at the end of October, and someone shattered my window and took my very valuable swim bag, which had my goggles, my favorite goggles. So this isn't something that just occurs on New Year's. So I'd like to know how you plan to address the issue of the lack of staff. Do you have a plan for that on days other than 1st and 2nd of January?
Well, yes, let me address the staffing issue. We have the reserve pool that currently exists, and we're in the process now of we're looking at putting a more robust process in place so that we can vet the members of the reserve pool. Right now, we have 2 active members of the reserve pool, and we have a 3rd member that's in the background process, waiting to see whether or not they'll be able to come on. Once we agree on the process, on how that's going to happen, then, and I get authorization, we will start bringing up more staff on board. And you should be seeing more patrol units. One of the things that I've had to do myself was to ensure that I get out of the office, and sometimes you'll see me driving in a marked Kensington patrol car, and sometimes you'll see me driving in an unmarked Kensington car. And the reason why I do that is because I know when I'm in a marked police department, I'm quite visible and behavior changes. When I'm not in the marked police car, I can get a fuller sense or a better sense of what's really going on through town to help me gauge how effective we are, even with the minimum staff that we have. Yes, ma'am. No, go ahead. Oh, sir.
I have to insist that you use the mics because it has to be recorded, and Mr. Bergen, for example, can't hear, so.
Okay. How are the reserve officers deployed? Are they deployed independently, or do they have to ride with an officer on patrol?
Currently, right now, the 2 patrol officers that we have are available to patrol independently. They've already been through a FTO process, which is a field training process that they all have to go through. With their prior experience, they are allowed to patrol on their own. We only require 20 hours per month from our reserve participants, and that's due to the fact that they have full-time jobs currently and families. So we allow them to come in when it's convenient for them, unless there's something that we need. For instance, if I had to ask for a bigger patrol presence, and I can anticipate in this case when the possibility of crime would occur, I would ask the reserves to come in.
I have two questions. First, can you explain what a reserve officer is, and if that's the best source, in your opinion, to fill in for these vacancies that we have? And two, I'd actually like to hear what your plan is for more patrolling, no matter what, because I happen to believe that the more visible the police are in our community, the better. That's what we pay for, and that's what my friends and neighbors are upset about, that we have half the police force we should have, and there doesn't seem to be anything being done to address that. So if you could deal with those issues, if you're prepared to do that today.
Yes. Kensington is kind of a unique situation. Given the fact that we're such a small agency, it is my opinion that the reserve program is a very good option for Kensington. By all means, it's not the only option, but it is the most effective option to see whether or not we can get individuals who understand and can function in such a small environment, so we have an opportunity to see how they work and to see how they interact with the residents. But I think it's quite effective, but you're right. By all means, it's not the only avenue where we can get officers. In the past, with some of the reserve officers that we've had and some of those officers that have left, that I would have loved to have still seen to be on staff here, it's been, in my opinion, a pretty effective method of recruiting. And the second part, it was about the patrolling. We're operating right now with a very limited kind of a skeleton crew. But I want to emphasize that this is not the first time that we've operated with this few officers. Actually, we're budgeted for 10 officers. We've been running with 9. Since about August of 2016, we've had 9 officers on the books, but we've been running patrol with about 6 officers. For various reasons, we've had several officers that were on the books, but were not able to come in to work as a police officer. So it's challenging, I will admit, especially when we have days like the January 2nd. We would like more officers, but unfortunately, this is the situation we have. So everyone has to step up. I have to get up, I have to go out on patrol, I even have to take calls. The sergeant goes out on patrol, the sergeant takes calls. The detective that we have is no longer solely concentrated on detective duties. Detective Martinez is actually in a dual role. He's doing both patrol and he's doing his detective responsibilities. So he has to be able to prioritize as to what's going to take precedent.
Have you looked at the possibility of retired officers to supplement the reserve officers, recognizing that if they are retired from PERS, they can only work 960 hours a year, but since you're only talking about 20 hours a month for reserve officers, it appears that a supplement of retired officers would be able to augment that, put more people, more officers on the street. Because it strikes me as patrol is one of the best remedies for defeating some of this activity. I mean, if criminals start seeing more patrols out there, rather than just one officer trying to cover Kensington, and at least two out there as a minimum, then maybe that would be part of the solution. So I know it may be difficult finding retired officers, but other jurisdictions and the ad hoc committee and looking at that, at least we did see one jurisdiction that used a lot of retired officers that were PERS officers. They didn't use them to the extent of there being more than 960 hours a year, but certainly it seems to be an opportunity at least to supplement your reserve situation.
I'll address that with 2 points. First, I believe the Kensington Police Officers Association would have to, if not agree, not challenge the fact that we're having that paradigm shift to bring in retired officers that have a limited amount of hours to work, as opposed to hiring full-time individuals. The second point I want to make concerning retired officers is, if we were to make that decision today to bring them on board, they still have to go through a background process. That process can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months before they could come on to work. As things are moving now, by the time that would be completed, I would suspect that the matrix report would be done so that we would have a better idea as to which way we wanted to go, whether we want to go pursue retired officers or bring in reserves or recruit from some other method for full-time officers.
I lived in the Bay Area since 1963. This year, I had the window of my car broken. First time. Today we went to San Francisco, and we kept seeing piles of broken glass on the street where cars obviously had been broken in. We have to recognize that as much as we may not like it, we're becoming a bit of a third world country. I've worked in Africa and Asia, South America a lot. And you just don't leave your car on the street because people take them, they vandalize them, whatever. Now, our patrol, our officers have been, and our department has been understaffed for a long time. We had at least 3 officers that were off for various reasons. That means there were 6 officers. And so the fact that we only have 5 now is kind of where we were at then. The fact that we are having more incidents of these kinds of break-ins simply reflects that our society probably is becoming a bit more dysfunctional, okay? Now, today, for the first time, I saw Kensington police officers on the street. I was happy about that. So what we need to do is we've been suffering from economy of scale. We have 10 officers, and if something goes wrong, legally, physically, medically, whatever, we're down, and we don't have the capacity to fill in. A larger department would have the capacity to fill in when things break down at the local level. So that's one of the prime reasons I think that should be considered in any contracting out. That if the agency that we contract out to is large enough, then they could fill in, and we would always have a full complement of officers. Now, the fact that we can't take our keys and leave them with the department office, that's well, we just have to suffer that. Thank you.
Hi, Chief.
Hello, Ms. Lipscomb.
I got to hold this way far away or Celia will get after me. I'm too loud. It sounds like we're dancing around getting full-time officers. Like we're holding off till we see what happens, and we're going to fill in with whatever. I mean, I admire you for dealing with trying to get people in there where you're not recruiting from the academy, where you're not posting for it and saying, hey, come on, join. I appreciate the sentiments that our society has changed and people are more out there and they're willing to, they have found Kensington, they have located it. But why aren't we just recruiting for full-time officers? Even if we're down some officers, if we've got 9 or 10 slots and we've got reserves, we have something of a bench to bring in when somebody gets ill. But no, we're going to wait. We're going to try to find out. We're going to see if we can lope along until some report comes out and not give the taxpayers of this community the full complement of officers they're paying for. I find that below the standard of care.
Well, I want to remind folks that unfortunately, we only had the retirement of 2 of our officers as of December 31st of 2017, and that tonight we have the MOU in front of you, which the board considered very important towards using as a tool for future discussions with potential police officers. Go ahead, please.
Mabry Benson again. Just a couple of comments. I was going to make the same comment that Mr. Gutierrez made about we have a small department. We don't have a deep bench. And just in the example of your 2 retirements, my understanding is you can't quiz people ahead of time. Are you going to be planning on retiring? They can just say that's none of your business until December 31st or whatever. You're kind of left in a lurch, and that's the problem with such a small department. You don't have a bench to call upon. My other comment was, let's see, okay, what we're 1 square mile. How many streets? How many miles of streets do we have? Does anybody know? Quite a few. Okay, quite a few. You can understand. There's quite a few, and my understanding is that in the wee hours of the morning, no matter how fully staffed we are, there's only 1 person on patrol. Okay, 1 person on patrol, how many times are they going to be going past your house to cover all the miles in this street? Realistically, you aren't going to see a policeman. You probably aren't going to see a policeman, but you aren't going to have a policeman intersect with some miscreant. That's just the reality of the numbers. We don't live in a police state. So, well, that's all I need to point out.
Good evening, Carl Kruger. A minor point. I appreciate your report, but until I got all the way to the end and it said, I asked so-and-so, I realized that you were the one who wrote it. See, you ought to touch your name to it, and it ought to be dated, because it's sort of an official document, and it ought to be, official. But the real reason I got up is, when I heard you say it takes 6 to 8 months to do the processing, recruiting, qualifying, all of that, and in 6 months, what I understood, I know what you said, but what I heard was, we're going to contract out anyway. That's the implication of what you said. I wouldn't count on that. We are not there yet, and there is going to be a hell of a lot happening before we contract out. Thank you.
Oh, I must say that Chief Hull is a defender of the department and has never suggested publicly or privately that he was driving towards contracting out. I can promise. I understand where the comment made.
That's what it meant.
I understand that this is an issue that we could discuss for a long time, but I think that maybe after the next comment, we will ask staff to consider this issue and perhaps agendize something for the next meeting, okay?
Yeah, I just want to say, Carl, I love you, but I don't think that's what he meant, honestly.
I didn't.
That's for sure out there. And when we have the discussion on contracting out, I want to be part of it.
So I have one last comment to make, and that's this. As you listen to what people are saying,
Yes, ma'am.
what we hear are a lot of explanations and not a lot of solutions. And I think what this community is looking for are solutions, and solutions that can make a change now. I agree with the other people who've spoken that we can't afford to wait 4 to 6 to 9 months to have this solved. We need to address the current situation we have under the current structure that we have. And instead of saying we can't do this and we can't do that, what I'd like to know, and what I think the board should be considering, perhaps with you or with Tony, is what are the possible solutions to this? Should we be recruiting from the academy? Should we be posting these jobs? Should we be looking for reserve people or retired staff? What are the pros and cons of that? And let's get it solved instead of just pushing it, kicking the can down the road, to quote what's happening on the national political scene. I'd like to see some action taken now, and I'm telling you that my friends and neighbors are quite concerned about this, because I don't live on the Arlington, I live well off the Arlington, and someone's coming onto our cul-de-sac and smashing my window and taking something out of my car. That's not Kensington. As to what happens in San Francisco, I'm in San Francisco every day, and I don't see a lot of smashed windows. So maybe I'm just not in the same part of town that you're in. But I will tell you that even if this is a subject that's becoming more prevalent, I still think that we have a responsibility as citizens of our community to do everything we can and not just say, that's life, because we don't pay for that. We pay for a police department that's fully staffed and that is taking care of the citizens of our community.
I think the KPD does not ever shrug their shoulders and say that crime is life. So with one more comment, Chief Hull, and then we'll conclude and move on to the consent calendar.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the fact that, yeah, I see him, that I am in the camp of keeping an independent police department intact in Kensington for the residents. So that being said, can I take one more? We're done? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we're concluded. I'm sorry. But if you, okay, well, all right, if we want to finish, I mean, we'll just go on.
One last comment, okay?
Can you hear me now? Oh, I can hear me. I spend a lot of time in San Francisco and Manhattan, and I see a lot of stuff in both cities that I really don't want to see here. My question is, you were talking about it being like a statewide, the actual crime itself, the shooting out the windows, that it was a statewide kind of network or something. How, you may not be able to discuss this, but how do we know that, and how do we know that they don't have other plans event throughout the year?
Well, answer the latter part of that first. We don't know. This is the first time I've seen this particular crime in this volume since I've been a police officer, which is why I think this is like a new phenomenon. The reason why I'm saying it's statewide, because I know that it has happened in Fairfield, it's happened in Vallejo, it's happened, when I spoke to the other chiefs, it happened in Berkeley, El Cerrito, and they said that it also happened in Benicia. So I don't, since it's crossing county lines, I don't think that this is just isolated to just this one particular area, as I believe it's more of a cultural phenomenon with a certain demographic of young people. So that's what I was speaking to when I made that comment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to item 7, to the consent calendar. I would like to pull the minutes from the December 14th meeting for a quick discussion. just simply on page 3 of the minutes, which is page 5 of our agenda, I noticed that in the first paragraph there, the Finance Committee, and this may have been my error when speaking, the way it's written is the assumption that Ms. Feldman and Ms. Lipscomb are on the Finance Committee. So I want to just make that distinguish for the record, and perhaps the way to do that is to just include the listing that was provided at that meeting. Final sentence of that paragraph. She thanked committee members, da, 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 da.
Well, were you meaning to thank Linda and others?
Absolutely, Linda and Gail, but they...
Why don't you say this, thank committee members, da-da-da-da-da, and meeting attendees, da-da-da-da-da.
And...
That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Thank you, that's my only note. I know it's minor, it's just in terms I know that folks sometimes... Oh, okay. Not at my nitpicking, okay. Okay. Good, we seek to provide entertainment as well as information. So that is all. Are there any other comments regarding the consent calendar?
My comment is I move to adopt.
All right, I second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. All right, the consent calendar passes 4-0. Now moving on to old business, the announcement of board committees. That is page 19 of our agenda. Our policy and procedures manual has some tricky wording, as folks will know. But the only appointees I will be looking to appoint tonight are members of the standing committee for which I am a coordinator. The reason for that is that we have a contradiction between what our policy manual says and our contract with Bayview has some clear lines on who participates in a solid waste committee. So I would like to, it does have some clarity that I would like Vice President Natoli, if you could bring that language next time we meet, and then we can identify how we should best go forward. So in terms of that, I would like to just request that the board approve a motion for me to appoint members of the Emergency Preparedness and Finance Committee this evening.
I'll so move.
Okay, and then we'll take public comment. Excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Stevens, I would just like for you to look very carefully at the possibility that there are two separate solid waste committees. One is the Solid Waste Coordinating Committee, which is a committee required by the state. It's composed of a member of the board. It's composed of a staff member of the district. It is composed of a supervisor or his representative. It's composed of one staff member from the county, and it is composed of one staff member from Bayview, the contractor. That's right. It seems to me that according to our policy and procedure manual, which we know is a pile of junk and it's going to be tossed anyway, but there is another committee that is a standing committee of the district. It's not related to the committee, to the county's committee or anything else. It is one that is composed of one or more members of the board and may or may not have members of the public. And I think you should just look at that to see if they aren't two separate committees.
That's the direction I'm leaning, but I want to have the evidence together so that we make sure that we are clear on that we are staffing both committees or one committee correctly.
Well, I understood you. You were trying to make it one committee and get it straightened out who was to actually be on it.
All right, any comment on my motion?
Didn't get a second yet.
Oh, okay.
Did you move?
I
thought I moved, but
You moved. I'm sorry,
So you
your
got a
motion. No.
somebody's got a second.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Yes.
Aye. All right, thank you for the authority, which I've been asked for, to appoint to the Standing Committee of the Board, and to the, to the Finance Committee for 2018. I would like to appoint Paul Haxo, Jim Watt, Carl Kruger, Paula Black, and Rob Furman. Those are folks who have been members of the Finance Committee in the past and requested belonging again. To emergency preparedness, if you'll give me just a moment, I apologize. I'd like to appoint Maya Churi, Derek Suring, Paul Moss, Paul Doro, and Larry Nagel as our representative from the Kensington Fire District. All right. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the first item of new business. The Kensington KPPCSD seeks to, discuss and approve a possible extension of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Kensington Police Officers Association. This appears on page 22 of your agenda. And would General Manager Constantoros like to introduce this item?
Yes, the draft first extension agreement is included in the packets. And I wanted to note that the association and the district came to a tentative agreement at the end of December for a one-year extension, which follows pretty much what the CPI is for the Bay Area. That this year is really a year of transition as we are completing the study of police services to determine the future direction of the department. Whatever that study concludes, it will probably be a department that looks somewhat differently, whether it's kept internally or whether the community and board favor a contracting option. So the POA agreed to this one-year extension because of that. We have some language we haven't completely ironed out, mostly related to the appeal process. So we're asking for a authorization to finalize the language subject to the approval of the General Counsel.
All right, public comment?
A couple points, Dave Spath. I think it's a reasonable agreement. I think it's a fair increase, 3% taking away 1 for the PERS contribution. Certainly is consistent with some of the local jurisdictions and their increases in their recent MOUs. One question I did have, though, it doesn't speak to the change in medical benefit premium for 2018. So should it be assumed that the district will cover the increase in cost, with the exception of the $125 per month that the employees are going to be contributing? Is that a fair assumption?
Well, there is no change to whatever the current language is, and if the district assumes that, then the district would assume that increase.
That is my assumption, yeah.
Well, that's what I
the
was
assumption.
assuming,
You're
but I
right.
was just looking for
I mean,
confirmation.
You're right, there is not an updated table for 2018.
Right, there
Yes.
is none, so my assumption was,
Yes.
as you've just explained it. But just a point as far as overall salaries are concerned, there are a number in the community who think that the police officers are highly paid. And if you look at the comparisons to other jurisdictions, Kensington officers probably are at the low end of the salary range, whether you look at El Cerrito, Albany, Berkeley, or even some of the smaller communities such as Over Marin, such as Ross and Tiburon and the like. At the same time, I recognize that we have a limited revenue stream that has to be taken into account when we consider salaries, so it is a balance, but I would hope that people would not think that this is increasing the salaries to an extreme compared to everybody else in the world. One thing I think you ought to consider going forward, obviously after the matrix study is done and whatever the conclusion or result of that is on the retiree medical benefits side. I would suggest that you look at changing the benefit allocation for any new hirees to provide the minimum. That is, the district would be providing the minimum amount covered under the law. So I remember it's the Public Employees Medical and Hospital Act. I may be short on that, but be that as it may, given the health benefit issue that the district is facing, particularly with regard to retirees, that I think you should look very closely at new hirees, not existing employees, but new hirees with regard to retiree medical benefits. Thank you.
Hi, I just had a question about, the general manager said that there was some language that you were seeking approval for. Has that language been agreed to by the officers?
No, I was seeking authorization to complete that discussion with the officers.
Oh, okay, thank you, that's what I wanted.
What are you grinning about? Okay.
Just wonder if you're mad at me.
Okay. I agree with much of what David said. And I think that I'm happy that we have an understanding early in the calendar year, which we have not had in many years. And I endorse the pay increase because it seems to be fair to me. And while I am happy that we have a contract, that does not mean that I'm necessarily happy with what the police department is doing. I think our police department could use some real improvements. And I think some of that needs to come from this side, some of it needs to come from our GM, some of it from our chief of police. I think our police staff ought to be thinking about what they're doing, and there are some things that they could improve on. And some of the things ought to come from us. We ought to insist that they do some things. We could run an independent, well-organized police department in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? I'd like to read a board comment from Christopher Deppie. I would like to state my support for the MOU between the district and the Kensington Police Officers Association as presented in the current agenda packet. From the data that has been presented to me, this is a fair offer and one that is certainly in line with current rates and standards. As long as we are employing our own police force, we should be responsible and do right by our officers. Also, we don't yet know what the ultimate outcome will be on contracting versus keeping our force. And if it does end up that we continue operating our own police department, we will need to be able to attract quality officers, and this MOU reflects our values, as well as realistic assessment of our current situation. Finally, I sincerely hope that this is the last MOU that has to be negotiated under a cloud of uncertainty. After the matrix report is finished, we need to come to a long-term decision and commit to it. Christopher Deppie. Would you hand that to Lynn for me so she doesn't have to? All right, is there any further comment? All right, I want to thank General Manager Constantoros and Council John Holtzman for negotiating on our behalf. I think this is a fair deal. We hope to bring this to you in December. Unfortunately, it was not finished at that time. But we do think it is a fair offer for both sides, and I would like to make a motion that we adopt the extension agreement between the Kensington Police Protection Community Services District and the Kensington Police Officers Association, with the caveat that the authority to negotiate and execute this contract be given to our general manager, subject to the review and approval of our general counsel.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. The motion passes 4-0. Yes.
Thank you for the vote. I wanted to note also that this was a very positive process. You know, negotiations can be quite adversarial, and I wanted to compliment the Police Officers Association for the way they conducted themselves and how they handled the negotiation, and that's why we were able to conclude this before their contract expired.
And I can confirm, having been around here for a while, that it's been quite rancorous in the past, and I was very impressed with how smoothly this was done.
Yes, thank you. And we look forward to having them serve the residents of Kensington in the coming year and hopefully beyond. All right, we're going to move now to a discussion of the upcoming vacancies of the special district seats of the Contra Costa County Local Agency Formation Commission, also known as LAFCO. So you'll see the documents on page 43. Each board member and general manager each board member of the independent special district within Contra Costa County can nominate a member of LAFCO. So these documents are informational only unless any of our board members would like to be nominated. If you would like to, we need to have a resolution on the February 8th agenda. So notification doesn't have to happen this evening, but please, if you would send me an email unless you would like to raise your hand right now. All right, they'll be thinking about that. And while they're mulling that over, we'll move on to item C. We're going to discuss the agreement with all city management services. This appears on page 52 of this evening's agenda. Excuse me while I move to that document. I have managed to bury mine in paperwork. Can I borrow? Yes, thank you. All right. The history of this is that the KPPCSD contracted with All City Management Services to provide a crossing guard at the intersection of Arlington Boulevard and Rincon Road. We were reimbursed for those fees through the West Contra Costa Unified School District. Now, in November of 2017, West Contra Costa Unified decided that they would end the contract at the end of this coming school year. So they voted to set reimbursement rates at $3,505 a quarter, not to exceed $14,020 for the school year. This will not should not impact the current contract that we have with All City Management, but we do need to adopt the new contract that has been provided by West Contra Costa County. So the first few pages there, beginning on page 53, those are just informational only. That is the contract for which we are committed with All City Management. And then page 56 and 57 contain the contract with West Contra Costa Unified. This will be something to consider in the coming budget cycle and for fiscal year 18-19, whether or not this district wants to consider funding that out of our own pocket, or how whether we can ask West Contra Costa at this time to pay for a crossing guard at this time. They're not interested in doing so.
Yeah, just a little more background. In the way past, the Kensington the KPPCSD paid for the crossing guard, and then there was a change in that arrangement. The WCC USD basically paid for it through us, and now they're ending that with all school districts. And, we as a community have to decide to pick that back up or not. So that will be a 2018, 2019 budget item.
Oh, yes, please.
There's actually some history that precedes that. The crossing guard used to be paid for by the school district. When the school district went bankrupt, the school districts, the school parents came to the services district because the school district had announced that it would no longer fund the crossing guard. And based on pleas from the school parents, the services district agreed to pick up the cost of the crossing guard until such time that the school district was back on its feet financially. And so when that occurred, it was actually simultaneous with the Sandy Hook School incident. And at that time, the school district recognized that it had some liability. And that was when Charles Ramsey, who was then a member of the school board, came here and wanted to enter into an agreement with us, as well as with other area police departments, primarily to ensure that there was an arrangement in place for police coverage. Thank you.
For folks on community organizations, that would be something to be considering as well. Since we haven't got into 2018, 2019 budget negotiations, I urge community groups to also be thinking about whether that's something they want to think about contributing to.
All right, are there any public comments on this? Please.
Andrew Gutierrez, as one who has used that crosswalk at the same time that the students are trying to cross it, I can attest that it's just a real zoo. There are a lot of people who really do not understand what that light means, and without the crossing guard there, it would seem to me that Kensington would have a huge liability. It's a dangerous place. And it was not uncommon to see people running the light just before students were trying to cross it. So I would encourage funding.
Andy, can I just ask you quickly, I'm going to have a meeting with Kate Roush on the Clusa Circle and Monish Shem sent from the county. It seems that it might make a lot of sense to have an actual stoplight right there.
You mean right here, Al?
Right here.
No, for sure, for sure. But, and I've asked that question before.
I know, and they always say
reasoning
no.
has been
Yeah.
that it impedes traffic.
That's right, it impedes the flow, exactly. But I'll take that up with her at that time, too. Okay.
Would you ask if they could at least look at hours at which that should be a working light? Because I can understand that there are certain times when, it may not be necessary. Maybe it's about the timing.
I think you should point out that they're impeding the flow is rather a phony argument. I mean, that is actually what we want to do, get it down to 25 miles an hour. When I asked our former GM to ask about a stop sign at Sunset, which is, I think, would slow down the traffic, where Sunset runs into the Arlington at the bottom of the steep hill where everybody picks up speed. And those of us coming up Sunset it's very hard to turn to see who's coming and how fast. It's a phony argument because they can speed all they want in front of Gutierrez's house and this stop sign, but boom, up at the gas station, there's a stop sign, and if I have to go out at 8 o'clock in the morning, boy, that's a really long wait to get through that stop sign. And slowing the traffic more often along that race course would even out the speed, and everybody who's going to be happier in the long run. It's a phony argument.
Thank you. We'll tell you when that meeting is, Maybrita. I propose that the KPPCSD enter into contract with the West Contra Costa Unified School District to provide crossing guard services and receive reimbursement.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Yes. Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 4-0. All right, we move on to emergency services. I am the coordinator of the Emergency Services Committee this year, and we are going to take an approach this year that we're hoping will feel natural and invite those folks to get involved in emergency planning. So you'll see, if not every meeting, at least monthly, a new emergency services bit of activity. We're going to begin with ways that we are interacting with you, notifying folks of an emergency. So tonight, we want to highlight the Contra Costa Community Warning System. This system is designed to inform you in the event of an emergency when there's a major threat to life or safety. Police or fire departments can activate the warnings, but you must be registered to receive the call on anything but a landline. And we know many of you don't have landlines anymore, or that might be not the primary way that you're notified of emergencies. So there's just the little brochure, and if you don't want to register online, you can use the final 2 pages of the agenda, enter your information, and mail it in. Please register. We need to have you be active participants in your own safety. And then next month, as I mentioned earlier, we will have a representative from Nixle coming to talk about emergency warning systems. Is there any comments?
Should you put that out as a mailer?
Yes, we will be compiling all of our recommendations and activities for emergency services in packeting on our website. It will appear, and we'll definitely be communicating with, hopefully via perhaps the Outlook or via a newsletter. Also, this information will be distributed to all the churches in the area, as well as the nursery schools. If you know of any other community organizations that have telephones for which they engage in activities and should be notified, please let me know, and I will make sure that they have this information and are included. Can we distribute it at the school? Yes, the school, they will receive as well an informational mailer, but we'll compile it into.
Yeah, I can actually ask if this could be included in the Thursday packet so this way parents would get notified. I mean, the school itself is one question about being put on it, but as far as distributing it, maybe we can put it in the Thursday packet.
Well, I was just going to say that, but we'll condense the information slightly, and then that information must go through the district office before being sent home with parents. Are there any other questions? All right. The final item of the agenda is a discussion of the calendar regarding board and committee meetings for 2018. I'd like to table this item, if only because we do not have yet a complete listing, and we're waiting for the date of our first finance committee meeting because the audit has not yet been released, which should come any day now, I'm hoping, and then we'll be able to plan the first finance committee meeting, which should occur sometime in early February. So if I can table this, then we'll, and with that, I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. We adjourn. Thank you so much. Please come and join us again on February 8th.